At some point, I had this real wish to understand what was going on, like what was happening in my inner world. And although there were a lot of messages of, like trust in God or go with the process or let it go, learn to just let it go and allow things to happen, in a certain way, I wasn't quite satisfied. I wanted to really understand what was going on. And I got into Ken Wilber, who was a big influence on me in those years. And through him, eventually came to the diamond approach of A.H. Almaas. And some of you may be familiar with the diamond approach. And what I loved about the diamond approach is there's just such a clear understanding about our experience, about who and what we are. And the way that that understanding comes about really is through the central practice of inquiry. So you don't have to know anything about the diamond approach. It really, in a certain way, doesn't matter because all it's about is about being interested and curious about yourself, about your experience, about the nature of your consciousness, like what it is that's going on. What are you experiencing? What's making it happen? What is it? Right. So inquiry is a way of working with your inner world. Right? So the inner world you can compare to an ocean, right? An ocean that has all the potentials of your experience in it. Your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, your relationships to everything that you experience in your life, your perceptions, and your very consciousness itself. Right? So all of this, when we talk about the inner ocean, that's really what I'm pointing to. And there are many ways of working with this inner ocean, of exploring it, right? And different spiritual practices engage with it in different ways. One way of engaging with it, for example, that's very popular these days is some kind of mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness is a little like lowering yourself down into the inner ocean, right? Opening up your awareness to become aware of what's around and then seeing the things go by, right? So you see the thoughts, the feelings, the different sensations that might arise in your consciousness, and you see them, right? You become aware of them. So part of the practice, part of the benefit of the practice is that you become more aware of what's happening inside you, that there is this whole world, and that it does include your very awareness itself. And then you learn to let them go, right? You see them and you let them go. You don't get caught by them. You don't get pick them up and run with them, right? And that's also very useful because that allows us to begin to recognize the things going on inside us, but not to be dragged around by them, to be able to let them go to some degree and find a bit more space and freedom. So all of that's amazing, right? That's wonderful, very helpful for a human being. And there are a whole lot of other possibilities as well, right? So one of the things, if you think about diving in the sea, right? Suppose you went diving in the sea and something went by, right? Well, what would you do, right? You might actually get curious about it. You might become interested in it so that you want to follow it and find out what it is, where it goes, what it does, how come it's there, and what's making it do whatever it does. Right? And so our inquiry is like that. What we do when we inquire is we get in touch with our immediate experience, with what's happening right here, right, in your awareness, whatever is on your mind, whatever you're feeling, whatever kind of sensations are present in your consciousness. And you're not just aware of them, but you want to get curious about them. It's like, oh, I wonder what that is. What's going on there? What's making that happen? So one of the key things about inquiry is this orientation of friendly interest, right? We get curious and friendly and interested in ourselves. We want to know what it's about and how come. that orientation of friendly interest can be a very surprising orientation and very different from many of the ways we usually approach ourselves, right? If you think about it, like how do we tend to approach ourselves? Well, we might be evaluating what we're finding, we might be assessing it or being critical about what we're finding, or we might be wanting to change it, right? I'm feeling sad, I need to cheer myself up, or I'm feeling frustrated, I shouldn't be feeling that, I need to get rid of that feeling. Or I'm feeling all this love, ooh, that's a bit intense, don't want to be feeling that. So positive experiences, negative experiences, ego experiences, spiritual experiences, all of them, right? We often have some kind of agenda. And with inquiry, what we practice doing is just bringing this curious, friendly, interested approach to actually find out more about that experience, right? So as useful as it is to see your anger and be able to let it go, just think how transformational is it to go, I'm getting really angry here. I wonder what's that about? What's making that happen, right? How come? There's obviously something meaningful going on there that needs to be seen and understood, right? So that little experience, whether it's a feeling or a thought or a sensation or some response you're having to something going on in your life, that's like the little fish in the ocean, right? And to inquire is to dive down into the ocean, to actually see and feel and kind of be with the fish as it's there, right, as it's happening. And then to kind of describe it and feel it and follow it and explore it in a live, immediate, palpable way, right? So you're not speculating about it. You're not going, well, that's a bit like what happened the other day, right? You're not trying to fit it into a theory or a framework. What you want to do is feel it and describe it and find out about the experience directly from the experience. Like, say I'm feeling light right now. I feel light. I feel quite happy and light, and there's a feeling of a smile comes, and I can actually sense the lightness in my heart. Like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? Feels like light and spacious and open. And then I feel a certain bubbly lightness starts floating up, and I can sort of sense some lightness in my head, right? So by getting in touch with the experience and feeling it and sensing it and taking the time to recognize and to find the words that describe it, we can begin to explore it and find out what's really going on there. What we're finding out is really what's true for us. So this is a central thing about inquiry. Inquiry is oriented to what's true for you. And when I say the truth, I don't mean kind of transcendental truth with a capital T, unless that happens to be the truth of what's arising for you, in which case that's it, right? If that's what's actually present for you, some kind of transcendent experience, then that's what you're inquiring into, right? You can describe what's that like? How am I experiencing it? So the truth is always just the honest, immediate, like you're sitting down with the best friend and they're just saying, what's going on? And you can just be honest about it. You don't have to dress it up. You don't have to make it more or less, right? But you don't assume you know everything about it. You stay open and you get in touch. So I sometimes describe, not to mix metaphors, inquiry is a little like wine tasting, right? You know, wine tasting, you can just down the bottle and it'll be what it'll be. But if you really take the time to taste it and to notice the nuances, you'll begin to see more. You'll begin to taste more. And the inner world is exactly like this. So the more we take the time to feel and sense and recognize and verbalize what's going on inside us, the more we begin to see. The more the experience begins to open and to take us deeper. And so this is really the magic of inquiry. Because you might wonder, okay, well, what's so great about describing where I am and getting in touch and following it? Well, one thing that's great about it is it's connecting you directly to your truth, right? To being real. If you want to be a real human being, to be true, to be who you really are, right? That's where you got to start, right? Where else are you going to start? And not only that, but as you discover that truth and you take the time to hang out with it, the truth starts unfolding, right? It starts taking you deeper. And so you start at the surface. You start with all the events going on in your life, what's happening in the totally ordinary circumstances of your life. You know, at your work, in your relationships, the bad morning that you had or the wonderful morning that you had, whatever it is. Like you start right there, right where you are. And as you begin getting in touch and feeling and sensing yourself and being curious about how that is and what it's like and how you sense it in your body, little by little, it will start taking you deeper. And what we find is that the inner ocean has all these depths and layers. And Carl was saying before we started, you know, like Freud, the whole idea of the conscious being the little bit that sticks above the ocean, well, of the iceberg that kind of sticks out above the sea, we find this is really true of our inner life too. So we start with what seems like just the outside, the circumstances of our life, that at first glance we just take to be how we experience them. But as we get more in touch, you begin to notice all these inner forces, all these things going on within you. Thoughts and feelings and sensations and judgments and ideas, right? And the more you get in touch with those and feel into those, they start taking you deeper and you start getting in touch with some of your psychological history and the ways that your consciousness has been shaped and influenced, right, in the past. And with inquiry, those kind of layers of your consciousness actually emerge very naturally, very spontaneously. Like you think about, oh, this is how I'm feeling about my boss. My boss said something to me the other day and I felt a bit hurt. Oh, let me feel that. Okay, what is this hurt? Well, it feels a bit painful. I feel a bit criticized. Yeah, I feel sort of, it stings a bit. Like I feel criticized, like not good enough. And then I might suddenly realize, oh, actually, I feel a little young. I feel like a little kid who's just been told that wasn't good enough. And it's almost like my boss is the teacher from back in the day. So we discover that these psychological parts of us are living right there within us, right? And with the inquiry, we can dive down and we begin to discover them. But we don't stop there, right? We keep going. Like, oh, that little kid, like, now I see, oh, I'm responding. I'm having all this difficulty with my boss because I feel like that little child who got hurt. And as I recognize that, and I see that, and I see that young part of me, then that in itself can begin a kind of magic to happen. Often, when people discover some young part of themselves like that, what comes very naturally is a kind of compassion, right? So you feel gentle, you feel kind and caring, right? And there's some natural response of the heart for that young part of you that had such a difficult time, right? Now, if you sense that movement, I describe that in the book, it's as if the waters of the ocean begin to take on a particular quality. In this case, the quality of kindness and compassion, right? And that kindness and compassion acts on that little young part to relax it. And suddenly, the way that you feel yourself in that situation is totally different, right? You're no longer coming at it from the perspective of that little kid. And instead, you have some quality of your own consciousness, some treasure of the inner ocean, your kindness and compassion that has arisen in response. So there's a magical way in which We get in touch with our experience, and our consciousness responds if we're present with it, if we're sensing it, if we know how to really be with it as we're exploring. And that magical transformation then begins, I want to say, a whole journey of discovery. Right? It turns out for everything that arises, there are all different qualities of our nature: our strength, our compassion, our joy, our determination, right? Our power, right? Our love, our kindness. All of these qualities, our openness, our inner freedom, all of these qualities of our inner nature, right, begin to emerge as we engage in this journey of discovery, this journey that begins just exactly where you are, exactly in the middle of your life as it's going on, right, and then takes you deeper and deeper. What we find over time, I mention this because being Watkins, there's lots of people with, I'm sure, a lot of spiritual knowledge here, is that journey will take us all the way into the non-dual, all the way into all the possibilities of human realization, right? It's an extraordinary, it's what makes the practice so extraordinary, right? We can discover the treasures of all spiritual realizations simply by engaging this practice of inquiry and finding out what's really the truth for us and following that truth. So the book, right? So the book, well, let me backtrack. Inquiry as a practice, then, there are books that have been written about it already. And one book is called Space Cruiser Inquiry by A.H. Almaas. And you may get a sense that the practice is very rich, very subtle, and it can take you very far, right? And what we've needed is a book that introduces inquiry in a really practical and accessible way, right? So to really start from the nuts and bolts, right from, do I speak? Do I write? How do I actually engage in this practice? What does that look like, right? How long do I do it for, right? All these kind of questions. Can I do it by myself? Can I do it with other people? So I go through all of these very practical sort of guidelines. And then we talk a bit about the orientation of inquiry, like how do you approach your experience in a useful way and explore that attitude of friendly interest, how to be friendly and interested in your experience, because that's really fundamental. If you think about it, you sat down with somebody who's not friendly and interested, if they're all judgmental or thinking you should be different, I mean, you're probably not going to open your heart and reveal your secrets, right? Why would you? So inquiry is like that. We learn how to be with ourselves in a kind, gentle, curious, attuned way. And then, how do we get in touch, right? What does it mean to actually get in touch with the immediacy of your experience? Excuse me, many practices talk about that, right? Getting in touch, but how do you do that? And so in the book, I give very practical instructions and practices that will help you get in touch. Get in touch in an immediate and palpable way with whatever it is that's going on for you, in a way that's like entering the inner ocean. And once you've entered the inner ocean, then you look around, right? You look around to see what's here. Where am I? Right? And that starts the dynamics of the process of inquiry. So there's chapters devoted to each of those different dynamics, like the finding where you are, taking the time to see what's on your mind, what kind of feelings are around, or what sensations are present, to recognize what's going on in your life, right? And how is that impacting you? You can see a human being is a rich and complex thing. Our inner world and our experience has a lot to it, right? So it really takes a certain skill, a certain practice to learn how to recognize where we are and see what's going on in this way. You see, with this kind of inquiry, there isn't it's not like there are 4 questions or 10 questions, or you do A, B, C, and that gets you somewhere particular, right? So this kind of inquiry really is like scuba diving. You dive into the ocean and then you see, where am I? What's around today, right? Because that's where you are. That's what's relevant for you. And then you follow it and you explore it. You get closer to it to see, well, okay, this is what's here in the ocean today. Let me find out about that. Let's get a little closer, spend some time with it, see what else we can find out about it. There are different classes of questions that, in a way, we need to look at. We can find out what it is, right? So suppose you're having a feeling of delight, right? Well, what's that like? How do you experience it? What does it feel like? If you were describing it to someone, like, how would you describe it? How do you sense it in your body? Right? How does it affect you? Right? You can ask other questions like, how come? What's making it happen? If you're feeling delighted, is there something that's actually causing that? So each of these questions is not it's not like a yes or no question. It's not a question where you have to figure out an answer. It's a question that's more like an invitation, a contemplation, like just a friendly, well, I wonder, what am I, what am I feeling so light about, so delighted about today? Right? What's making that happen? Oh, I don't know. Just this feeling itself, maybe. Or maybe it is linked to some event, and then you can notice that, right? So you find out what it is, you find out what's making it happen, what's it about, right? And then you see how it is, how it affects you to see that. Like, oh, well, how is it for me to see that, right? And that kind of begins this dynamic process, seeing where you are, understanding what's making it happen, being affected by it, and then uh, that kind of, yeah, that begins this very dynamic unfolding of the inquiry. So the book goes through all of that. We touch on the different stages of the process. We touch on some of the things that people get really tangled in, right? So one of the barriers that a lot of people get stuck in when they begin inquiring is the inner critic. In fact, the inner critic, I'm sure some of you know, is a significant barrier, to any kind of inner work. So when we begin to become more aware of our inner worlds, one of the things we begin to notice is, that chattering voice often sits up here telling you, that's bad, you're pathetic, how could you do that? What's wrong with you? You shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be feeling that, right? Why can't you do this properly? So we can have a whole barrage of chatter and inner dialogue that's basically getting on our case, giving us a hard time. So there's 2 chapters in the book that actually look specifically at the inner critic and ways of beginning to work with it, because it's one of those things that if we don't learn how to work with it, it will just keep dragging us back. In fact, in the book, I compare the inner critic to, it's like the Coast Guard, the lifeguard. You want to go swimming out to sea, and there's a lifeguard that every time you move out of a little zone that it's decided is okay, starts blowing the whistle, wants to haul you back to shore and make sure you stay in a little paddling pond. Right? So really working with the inner critic, being able to begin to escape its bounds is very important. So we go a fair bit into that. It's one of the key things. And then I talk sort of about some of the particular realms, like going more deeply into 3 realms, 3 layers or dimensions of our experience, which are our mind, our heart, and our sensation or belly. Right? And the mind, of course, has all of our ideas and thoughts, our knowings and recognitions, our very consciousness itself. The heart, all of our emotional reactions, right? Anger and sadness and fear and anxiety and all of that, right? And all the positive feelings of the states of our being, love and kindness and passion and sweetness, all the realm of the heart. And then the belly, right? The sensation, where most people think about belly as, the sensations of the body, right? Like the actual physical sensations, anatomical sensations of the body. But this is really one of the most important doorways that I want to open with this book, that I want people to begin to get a sense of the possibilities of. Because sensing our experience actually gets us in touch with much more than just the body, right? So you can see this in so many expressions we use in the English language, right? So if somebody is happy, we say they're light-hearted. If they're sad, we say they're heavy-hearted, yeah? If they're warm and generous, we say they're warm-hearted. And if they're mean and unfeeling, we might say they're cold-hearted or hard-hearted. So did you ever wonder why? Why do we say those things? Is it a neat figure of speech or a nice turn of phrase? So it turns out it's actually more than that. So if you actually take the time when you're feeling, say, generous and giving, and you sense your heart area, you might at some point in the center of your chest be able to feel some kind of warmth, right? Like a warm, opening, giving kind of sensation. If you're feeling sad, right, you might actually begin to feel a kind of soft, aching sensation in your heart. Or if you feel joy, some kind of lightness, like a light, weightless, bubbly, expansive kind of quality, right? So it turns out that these are actually subtle sensations that are there in our language all the time and are actually there to be discovered in our experience. With inquiry, we include that layer of our experience. We take the time to become sensitive to that layer of our experience because that begins to connect us with our very consciousness itself. Right? So you start off, you begin to recognize, oh, I can actually sense the joy in my heart, right? Other examples, like you might feel open-minded, right? We use that phrase, open-minded. Like when you're feeling very open-minded, you might notice that your mind, your head center, actually feels open in a way. There can be a sense of open, spacious emptiness, right? That's open to possibilities. And when you feel closed-minded, you might notice that you kind of feel almost contracted and dense and thick and heavy around your head, right? So these are actually sensations that we can sense. These turns of phrase that are actually pointing to a reality that we call the felt sense, right? The felt sense of our experience. And the felt sense really is the doorway to sensing our very consciousness itself, our nature, the nature of our consciousness. Now, probably if I'm feeling heavy-hearted and somebody were to open up my chest, my heart is not going to be any different, right, than when I'm feeling lighthearted. So it's not a physical, anatomical thing in my body, but it is an experiential thing. It is something that is very palpable and obvious in my experience, right? So that dimension of the felt sense really gives us a grounding because as we get more and more in touch with ourselves, at some point you recognize, your mind can be going on with all kinds of stories and theories and speculations, and the heart can be whizzing around with all kinds of emotions and reactions, and, all of this can be going on. But when you really sense yourself and you learn how to sense and to land in your sensation, right, you really get in touch with the reality of what's actually going on, right? What is really here, really present. And the more you develop that sense, that sensing capacity, that becomes the doorway to sensing presence, right? You're sensing the very here-ness, the presence, the here-ness, the palpable immediacy itself. right? And that is the surest, clearest um, way of knowing and being in touch with whatever it is that's actually going on for you, right? And the clearest and most direct way of being in touch with your own consciousness, with your own nature, right? As we learn to sense and discern that presence, right? At some point you recognize, oh, I'm actually present. I'm here as this presence, this living, palpable here-ness that I can feel and sense in my body, in my heart, in my head, right? That opens up a whole world of possibility, right? At some point, we even begin to recognize, and again, I'm sure you can recognize some of these experiences yourself, our sense of the presence may not even be limited to our body. It's like when you walk outside, you step outside on a beautiful day, and suddenly it feels like everything opens up and gets light, right? Your sense of the whole world changes. So all of these experiences, which are, I want to say, like spiritual experiences, deeply meaningful experiences, turn out to be experiences that we really can contact and live from, right, in an ongoing way in our daily lives, right? And the very things that are going on in our lives, the very content of our lives becomes the doorway through which we discover our presence more and more. And our presence in turn comes more and more into our lives. So when you feel and sense and know yourself as the presence of kindness, right? Your heart is this substance that is just pure kindness. That's just the nature of what you are, right? When you feel and know and are being that, right? That's very different than when it's just an idea or a thought or a passing feeling, right? Or when you sense yourself as the solidity of a kind of grounded, solid, real, dense here-ness that can go about your life, that can be in the world, right? In a clear, solid way, right? With confidence and ease, right? Again, a very different experience. Most of us have hints of these different qualities. We have little glances, little conditions in our lives where they can emerge, but much more is possible. And with inquiry, by exploring into what's happening in our inner world and following it all the way through to the level of presence, we begin to open up those possibilities to become more available in our lives. And then it turns out we don't have to leave our lives, we don't have to leave the world, we don't have to drop it in order to have our spirituality. The very nature of what we are, our being, can come all the way in, all the way through to our daily lives. Right? And our lives can become an expression of that true nature. So this is the possibility of inquiry, right? This is what makes me so excited about this practice, so wanting to share it, wanting to invite people to discover its possibility and its richness. And the book is really sort of a step-by-step towards the first steps of engaging in the practice, diving in the inner ocean. So there are a couple of things. So one thing I'm doing, there's a good place to start is a monthly session called, a little tongue-in-cheek, I'm calling it Dive In with Dom. So it's a Wednesday evening, 6:30 until 8 p.m. UK time, right? And that is really a forum that begins to introduce the practice. And we have people who are experienced with inquiry, people who are new to inquiry, and I do some guided practice. We have space for questions and discussion about the practice. And then there's also some people will actually do some inquiries with my assistance, with my guidance, and we use those to draw out certain features of the practice. So that's a wonderful place to really get a first taste of it. And then beginning next year, I'm going to be offering some online courses, right? So there'll be courses with a combination of some self-study, things you can go and do yourself, and then some live meetings with a teacher and with other people that are learning the practice, so that you can begin to engage it in that way. So those are two things that definitely are worth checking out. My website is www.domliber.com, right? So go there and you'll see, you'll and look under on the book tab, right? And you'll find it there. Let me pop that in here, /book. That's a good place to go. And there's a website that we're just launching now, so it's just getting going. But I'm going to tell you guys about it because it's just about ready to go, and that's divein.life. So dive in is really about diving into your experience and exploring it. So that's one place you can go. So Sharon, a counselor I spoke to today, suggested I might think about writing a book of my experience. This would help me. Would this book help me decide? Sure. So inquiry is about clarifying and finding out what's true for you, whatever that might be, right? Whether it is discerning a course of action, right? So, okay, I want to think about writing this book, right? Let me see, would that be useful? That's something you can, what comes up in me when I think about doing that? The inquiry itself it's really interesting. I mean, writing a book of your experiences, I'm curious to know what it means more, because you could be, for example, just writing about what's happening, right? You could write about things that have happened to you. People think about doing that, right? Like writing an autobiography kind of thing, and that can be very useful, right? Inquiry includes elements of all of that, right? Your starting point is always just what's going on for you here, right? And as you explore what's going on from you here, it will bring in aspects of the past, I want to say, like, as they connect with what's going on for you here, right? So it's a very natural, organic process. As we start getting in touch with our inner world, that does happen, right? So what I said now goes further. Like, our history actually does all start emerging, and all these kind of early formative experiences that have had an impact, basically they've left an impression on us, and those impressions begin to surface, right? And we begin to see how they're shaping and influencing us now. So the inquiry is always just to explore them, right? You just follow them, let them come up, find out about it, feel into it, like, oh, I feel small and scared, and there's something terrifying. And okay, I'm going to sense myself, sense my arms and legs, and really stay present and see little by little if I can allow that experience. Like, be with it, be open to it, and explore it, right? And it's worth saying that, particularly where there's traumatic experience, right, and very challenging experience, which everybody has some very challenging inner experience, formative experience, and some people have, specifically traumatic type experience. We need to be friendly and kind with ourselves in exploring that too. So the truth is, it is true that inquiry will take you to the whole of your inner ocean, right? It's going to take you everywhere in time. It's going to take you to the most wonderful, incredible places within yourself, and it's going to take you to the absolute terrible places that, in a way, your personality is completely constructed to avoid, right? So inquiry is going to take you there in time. And we need to be skillful and kind and make sure we have the support that we need to allow ourselves to go there in a helpful way, right? In time, from my own experience and what I see working with people and other people who teach inquiry, is these places all begin to open up, And what we find is that at the heart of all of these places, there's usually some very difficult, deficient feeling, right? Some feeling of maybe no love or no support or no value or something like that. And what we learn in inquiry is that those holes, those deficiencies, are the very interesting doorways through which we gradually learn to explore. But that's getting into, deep diving. And with a bit of luck, that will be the subject of the next book. This book will give you enough to get going. But I would say yes, that's going to come up, and it is beautiful and terrifying. And if you can be with it, if you can stay present, sense yourself, and continue to explore it and find out, what is it that's here? How does it affect you? What do you experience yourself to be? In time, that will begin to open up in ways that you can't imagine in advance. What I'd like to do, let's take a few minutes, like just a few minutes now, and just get a little practical sense of it here, right? So just take a moment, right, and just maybe let your eyes close and just sense yourself now. So what do I mean by that? Notice, what do you sense in your body? Like, what kind of sensations are here at the moment? You might notice your feet on the floor, your butt on the chair. How do you sense your legs? Do you sense your legs? Or your pelvis, or your belly? What kind of sensations do you notice in your chest, in your heart area? So you see, you can feel them and sense them, and even say a word to yourself, like, how would you describe it? Feels tingly or quiet or a little agitated. Just whatever's actually going on for you. Then the sensations in your head. What do you sense there? How do you experience your head? Does it feel tight or achy or a bit headachy or relaxed and open? So you see, you can notice these things. You can get in touch. And then I could say, like, how are you feeling? What sort of feelings here? What kind of emotional tone are you in touch with in this moment? See if you can find a word or two for that. One thing you might notice sometimes is, well, not much. Like, I'm not really feeling much right now. And if that's what you find, that's perfect, right? That's the truth. That's what you're in touch with. So the beauty is you don't have to make anything up. You don't have to crank anything up. You don't have to try and find a clever answer or a right answer. The answer is just whatever's there, just whatever you can tell when you give yourself a little time. And then you might notice, how is your mind doing? Right? Is your mind very busy and thinking and whizzing around, or is it sort of listening to what I'm saying and judging and criticizing every other sentence? Right? Or does it feel open or curious or interested, tired? So again, just noticing however you are and seeing what you can say about it. And now, finally, just take a moment to notice, how has it affected you to do this? How has it affected you to take a little time to get in touch with these levels of your experience and to recognize a little bit what's there? That might have had an impact that you could also verbalize or say something about. So that gives you like a little taste. That's like a little 2-minute sort of beginning, for example, of an inquiry, like just getting in touch with what's here. And as you do that, you can see you could speak it out loud in answer to Carl's question. You could speak it out loud. You could be describing, articulating it out loud. You could jot down points in your journal or on your computer. Anyway, it's fine. There's no rule. There's no right way or wrong way. You can do it just silently in your head. There is for sure a benefit that comes from not always just doing it in your head. So somehow we get clearer when we actually speak it or write it. Similarly, you can do that by yourself, right? You can be sitting there just verbalizing, exploring your experience by yourself, or you could be sitting with somebody witnessing you and just, speaking your inquiry out loud and having someone else hear it, right? You're not doing it for them. They're just there. They're like a diving buddy. You're leading, going, following wherever you want to go, and they're just accompanying you, with you. Right? So that gives you a sense of some of the practicalities of inquiry. The most important thing to say is that there are no rules and there's no right way to do it, right? Where the questions really come from is just your own living curiosity being in touch with your experience, right? So as you get in touch with yourself and like the first thing you might ask is, oh, well, just what's here? What's going on? Where am I? That's a little bit what we were doing just now, right? Where am I? What's up for me? And you say a little bit about that, and then you might get interested. Then you see, well, okay, so that's everything that's going on right now. What draws me? What am I curious about? Right? What don't I know about? Or what do I want to find out more about? Where's my curiosity pulling me here? Right? And then as you begin to see, oh, yeah, that thing that happened yesterday, that's really on my mind. I really want to know about that. Okay. Well, what is it? Right? What's going on there? Right? And so you might begin to stay with that experience and unpack it more, right? Describe more about the features, how you feel, what happened, what it meant to you, what you're sensing in your body as you talk about it, right? So you're staying with it and asking that question like, well, what is it? What's going on here? And what's it about? Like, how come? Right? If I had that reaction, well, what made me react like that? How come I responded in that way? Right? So these are the kinds of different questions, different contemplating attitudes. And they're like diving moves. As you dive in and you discover something, then the next question in a certain way just naturally comes from, oh, well, hell, like, what is that? Right? It's just your own interest as you're exploring this coral reef of your inner world. And then another class of question I mentioned earlier was well, how does it affect you, right? As you might have seen now when you did the little exercise, even just checking in, like, has an effect. You're like, oh, okay, I notice I feel a little more settled, or I feel, I feel really agitated. I didn't know I was feeling that, and now I feel even, more agitated. That might happen, right? But that allowing and recognizing those impacts. So the book gives examples of different types of questions in each of the different chapters, right? So you have this toolkit of different possibilities and you get to try them all out. And then when you are free exploring in a free way, when you're free diving, then whatever is needed can come up, or you can think, okay, I've got all these different things I could ask. Let me see what I want to ask. Yeah, yeah, the inner critic is just such a big thing, as I said earlier, and really the knack. I mean, there are ways of working with the inner critic that have become quite popular these days. Like I've seen a lot of self-compassion centered stuff, right? And that's great, like bringing some more compassion into recognizing how you're beating yourself up and sort of giving yourself a hard time, and to try and bring some compassion instead. With inquiry, the way of working with it is the same way we work with everything, right? You just want to get as clear as you can about it. You want to see it in as much precision and clarity and feel it as fully as you can, right? So the more you feel it, right? So for example, suppose you're feeling sad one day and then there's this voice in your ear going, oh, pull yourself together. You're such a misery. Nobody likes somebody who's sad. You know, get on with it. You notice that. And then you might go, huh, okay, I'm feeling sad and I'm feeling bad about feeling sad. Okay, that's not great. How come I'm feeling bad about it? Then you recognize, oh, there's this message that I shouldn't be, right? And as you really recognize that, many different things can happen, will happen spontaneously. That's the magic. One of the things that might happen is you go, shit, well, who said so? Who says I shouldn't feel sad? What the hell's that about? Where did I get that idea? Right? You might find there's like some whole thread that goes back to your childhood that you were never allowed to feel sad, right? You were always told you have to cheer up and put on a nice smiley face because nobody likes a sulky kid, right? So the more you see this clearly, the more different parts of you will begin to respond. And one of the key responses, so recognizing the hurt and the suffering, and that tends to bring the compassion, as I mentioned earlier. And I see that in the self-compassion work. But the other thing that tends to come up, like when you recognize that's a voice coming at you, that is something your parent said to you or somebody said to you. Something in you can start to go, what the hell? Just give me a break. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to be pushed around by that anymore. And so what we find is our strength can begin to arise. And strength is very important because the inner critic takes your strength and basically bashes you over the head with it. And if you're going to be effective in escaping from it, at some point, you're going to need your strength. You're going to need to say to the inner critic, to the Coast Guard, get out of here, get off my case. I'm going to be where I am, right? If I'm sad about this, I'm sad about it. And if you don't like it, take a hike, right? So some kind of strength and will and determination can begin to come as we engage with it. But always, always, the thing in inquiry is to be as clear, to get as in touch, and to get as clear about what's going on as you can, and then allow that dynamism to go where it goes. Yeah, go and check out divein.life. There's going to be some great online resources there that will help you engage the practice. It's small at the moment, but we're going to be building it out. And come along to the Dive In with Dom. I'd love to see you there. And then we really get down and get into it, and you can get a very palpable taste of it. And if you already do inquiry, you can get to sharpen up your practice. So love to see you there. Very much for having me. It was a real treat to be with you.